Hello. The two most recent episodes on Football for Kids, on the EFL preview and the Premier League preview, are long ones. They also took me a very, very long time to make. In fact, they took me about 30 to 35 hours to research, write, edit and publish the two episodes. I make Football for Kids because I love football. And I make it because I want to give you all the stats, facts and information that I possibly can. I want you to listen to it and enjoy it, and most importantly, be inspired by it. But if there's anybody out there who isn't supporting the podcast on Patreon, please can I ask you to consider it. It helps me to keep the podcast going and flowing. Welcome to the Football for Kids podcast with me, Darren Rees. I hope that you enjoyed the big EFL preview podcast. In this episode, we're going to be getting excited and looking at what's to come in the Premier League this season, because this is not the big Premier League preview, it's the massive Premier League preview. There's no time to do any shout-outs or messages on this episode, as we've just got so much to get through. But my only request to you lot is please make sure you've hit the follow or the subscribe button wherever you are listening to this podcast. And if you're listening on Yoto, then please make sure that you've added it to your podcast library. Right then, 3 teams exited the Premier League last season, and 3 teams have entered it this season. The 3 which made their exit last season were Sheffield United, Luton and Burnley. The 3 that entered were Southampton, who won a playoff final, Ipswich, who finished second, and then Leicester, who won the championship. Leicester's Jamie Vardy promised the fans that they would return to the Premier League this season. And that is exactly what they have done. So fair play to him and all of the other Leicester players. So what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to briefly go through each and every team and look at some of the key things from last season and what they'll need to do this season to make sure that it is a success. It's going to be a long episode, so strap yourself in and get ready. And I would also love to hear from you and for you to get involved in this episode. So once you've listened to it all, please do get in contact with who you think will win the Premier League, who you think will get relegated, who you think the dark horses of the league will be, and all that other good stuff. As always, please ask an adult to send an email to footballforkidspodcast@gmail.com. So we'll kick things off with Bournemouth. And we'll go through the teams in alphabetical order, because that just makes logical sense. AFC Bournemouth may only have an 11,000-seater stadium, but their fans make you feel like you're in a 50,000-seater. Last season, there was moments where it looked like they were heading the wrong direction for far too long. But eventually, they pulled it back and ended up finishing a solid 12th in the Premier League. And they made it to the 5th round of the FA Cup. However, Bournemouth have just announced that Dominic Solanke will be leaving the club. He was their top goal scorer, and he was a man who made things happen when they needed it so much. Bournemouth have a tough end to the season in terms of fixtures this year, with games away at Manchester City, Arsenal and Tottenham to name a few. So they will need to make sure that they have sealed their Premier League spot before they get towards the last couple of months of the Premier League season. But who knows? Could Bournemouth push on to the top half of the league this year and maybe even get a spot in Europe? We'll just have to wait and see. My gut feeling is Bournemouth will finish in a similar place to where they did last season. So, from the south coast with AFC Bournemouth to the next team on the list in North London, and that of course is Arsenal. The last time Arsenal won the league was in the 2003 to 2004 season, but in the last couple of seasons they've looked the best they have in years, especially in the English top division. Last season they finished second in the league and they made it to the quarter-finals of the Champions League. They only lost 2 games at home last year, and they only lost 3 games away last season. Also, last season, Arsenal scored bundles of goals. Bukayo Saka was responsible for 20 of them. And with Mikel Arteta in charge and with all their great players, a couple more away wins could mean that Arsenal do it and win the league for the first time in a couple of decades. But the question is, what do you think? Do you think that they can do it? So, from North London to north of my favourite road, the M25, we're going up to the Midlands. Aston Villa had a quality season last year. So good that they'll be playing Champions League football this year, as they finished 4th in the Premier League. However, Aston Villa's big challenge last year was getting the wins away, as they drew 4 of their away games and they lost 7 of them. If Aston Villa can build on their away games, who knows? They could have an unbelievable season and even win the league. The star of the show for Villa last season was of course the amazing Ollie Watkins, who was their top goal scorer last year. Aston Villa playing in the Champions League this year against top opposition will mean that they're going to be playing a lot of top level football, and that can knacker the squad out, and it can have an effect on their Premier League results, especially towards the end of the season. But with goalkeepers like Martinez and forwards like Ollie Watkins, I reckon Villa could be in for another cracker of a season. Where do you think that Aston Villa will finish when it comes to May next year? From Aston Villa, let's go to Brentford. It was a tough old season for the West London club last year. They missed Ivan Toney as he was unavailable to play for some time, and they really struggled on away soil as they only won 5 of their away games. Can Brentford have a better season this year and beat last season's 16th position? With Ivan Toney in full form and scoring penalties without looking at the ball, and with their top defender Rico back in action, Brentford could have a better season. What do you think Brentford will look like this season? Do you think they can improve on 16th, or do you think they could be in trouble? Get your thoughts, feelings and opinions into footballforkidspodcast@gmail.com. So from Brentford in West London, let's go to the Amex and to the Seagulls in Brighton. Brighton finished 11th last season, but it was a bit of a hit and miss season, with a lot of draws, 12 in total. They also did very well, considering they had 7 more goals scored against them than they scored themselves. The points which they picked up in their draws really helped them out, and it worked in their favour. Brighton have a Brazilian forward in their team who joined last year, and he is a bit of a goal scoring machine. Pedro, who was a Watford player, is the sort of player that when he is fit can cause some serious problems for other teams and earn Brighton some well needed points. I think Brighton will do very well this year, and I can even see them getting a European football spot. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree with me? So from Brighton and Hove Albion, we go to Chelsea. Last season, Chelsea were looking like they may finish in the middle of the table for quite some time, but they pulled it back to finish 6th. They did lack in defence and made a lot of mistakes last season, which meant that 63 goals were scored against them. When you compare that to Arsenal, who had 29 goals scored against them, and Manchester City, who had 34 goals scored against them all season, to get themselves back in the mix and in the top 4, they're going to need to tighten up that defence, because 63 goals scored against one team is a lot of goals. Chelsea have potentially also lost Conor Gallagher, and he was one of their most reliable and used players. In fact, he was their most played player, and he played over 3,100 minutes of Premier League football for Chelsea last season. He barely missed a game. However, they have got a secret weapon up their sleeves. He's really cold. In fact, he's ice cold. And his name is Cold Palmer. I think Chelsea could finish in a very similar position this season, but I'm sure the Chelsea fans listening will be expecting a little bit more. What do you think? Do you think Chelsea can finish above 6th this season, or do you think it will be a worse season? So from West London, we're off to South London and to Selhurst Park, the home of the Eagles. Of course, Crystal Palace. Last season, Crystal Palace finished 10th. Roy Hodgson returned and then he left again. And now Oliver Glasner is in charge, and it seems that Palace fans are pretty happy about it. Palace, by the end of last season, seemed to be going in the right direction. The story of Palace's last season is a bit of a mixed bag to say the least. They won 8 games at home, but then they lost 8 games away. They scored 57 goals against opposition teams, but then they had 58 goals scored against them. To push and to finish in the top half of the league this season, Palace are going to need to get some good results at the start of the season, as in the opening couple of months, they've got games against the likes of Manchester United, Chelsea away, Liverpool and Tottenham. If they can grab a few wins out of those opening games, they should have a steady season as the season goes by. How do you think Crystal Palace will do this year? Well, from Palace we're off to Merseyside. Everton fans probably couldn't wait for last season to end, because they must still be scratching their heads and wondering what happened to their team. It wasn't that long ago that they were in the top half of the Premier League, and last season they not only finished 15th, but they scored less goals than any other team who will be joining them in this year's Premier League. That is not a good look for Everton. Their manager, Sean Dyche, saved them from relegation, just about, and there is still a lot of work to do, especially up front. The club's top goal scorer last season was Dominic Calvert-Lewin. He will need to score some very important goals to get the blue side of Merseyside back to where they used to be, and that really is the top half of the league. Everton also have a brand new stadium, which is almost completed, so by the time the club move into there, they really will want to be in a good place. Do you think it will be a repeat of last year for Everton, or do you think they can do a lot better? I think Everton will do much better this season, and we're going to see a stronger Everton side throughout the whole season. Get your thoughts, feelings and opinions into footballforkidspodcast@gmail.com. Fulham are our next team. They finished 13th last season. They would have done a lot better if they could have got a few extra results or even draws on away soil, as they lost 9 of their away games and they only picked up 4 victories when playing on away soil. The coach, Marco Silva, who isn't just Portuguese, but a Portugueser, he is pretty well liked by the Fulham fans, and he's doing some good stuff for the Cottagers. He is the man who can get the team results. The man who can get the team results and get the ball in the right place to score the goals is the Brazilian Pereira. He was Fulham's top assister last season, and as long as he's on the pitch, I'm sure he will create the chances that Fulham need, and if they can create those chances, then they can collect those points. How do you think Fulham will do this season? Ipswich Town are next on our list. They are the new recruits to the Premier League. In fact, the last time they were in the English top division was 22 years ago, so they will be thrilled to be back. Last season, they were incredible. They finished 2nd in the Championship, and they only lost 1 game at home in the whole season. That is quite something. However, Ipswich haven't been dealt an easy start to this season, as their 2 opening games are Liverpool and then Manchester City. The Welshman who plays up front for Ipswich is the player that the Premier League defenders will be speaking about. He's the man who can make a difference when the club need it most. And last year, he was Ipswich Town's top goal scorer. Ipswich did extremely well last year. But like the likes of Sheffield, Burnley and Luton found out, it's not a walk in the park in the Premier League. It's one of the toughest leagues to play in the world. How do you think the new recruits Ipswich Town will do? Next up, it's Leicester City. But after the 2022-2023 season and Leicester being relegated, Jamie Vardy and his teammates promised the Leicester City faithful they would return the club to where they belonged. And that, of course, was the Premier League. And that is exactly what they did. They've got a quality manager in Steve Cooper, an unbelievable goalkeeper who saves worldies from hitting the back of the net, and of course they've got the proud, passionate and extremely experienced Jamie Vardy. I haven't got a clue how this season will go for Leicester, but if it's anything like 2016 when they won the Premier League, then Leicester fans will have an extremely good time indeed. How do you think Leicester will do this year? From one L to another, we're going from Leicester to Liverpool. They finished third last season and Jurgen Klopp called it a day. He was the Premier League's longest serving active manager. Now he's gone, it's Pep Guardiola. Slot is the new coach. He was once a player for the Netherlands and he's joined Liverpool as the head coach, and he has big shoes to fill. He's a manager who's done very well in the Dutch top division, and he's well respected and well thought of across the footballing world. Last season, Liverpool scored a whopping great 86 goals in the Premier League, with their main man, Mighty Mo Salah, being their top goal scorer and being their top assister. They only lost one game at home, but on away soil, they struggled to turn draws into wins, with 7 games ending with Liverpool and the opposition sharing the point. Can Mighty Mo have another worldie of a season and pull it out the bag to get Liverpool the wins that they need so much? I think Liverpool will finish in the top 4 this season. What do you think? So from third place last year to first place last year, let's go to Manchester, but the blue side. Manchester City under Pep Guardiola have been unstoppable, and last year was no different. They won the league. They made it to the FA Cup final, and they didn't lose a single game at home. In fact, they only lost 3 games all season. They scored 96 goals in the Premier League, and their starting 11 is quite frankly insane. Foden, Haaland, Rodri, De Bruyne, Silva, and that is just naming a few. City still have Pep Guardiola. They still have elite players both on field and on the bench in every game, and they are a team of winners. Not a lot has changed for City since last year, and I think it's pretty likely they'll win the league again. There's also a lot of talk about this potentially being Pep's last season for City. How do you think City will do this year? Will they win the Premier League again? I think they probably will. So from the blue part of Manchester, let's cross the road to the red part of Manchester, where Erik ten Hag has got a final chance to make it work. And if he doesn't, well, I don't think he'll be the Manchester United manager for too much longer. Last season, Manchester United finished 8th in the Premier League. They went out of the League Cup in the 4th round and exited the Champions League in the group stages. But they did, however, beat Manchester City at Wembley Stadium to lift the FA Cup trophy in an all-Manchester derby. Last year, Manchester United won 10 out of 19 home games, but they failed to pick up the available 3 points on 11 occasions when playing on away soil. They also had more goals scored against them than they scored themselves, and they just couldn't quite put it together in the Premier League. Can Erik ten Hag turn it around and not only win a few more games at home, but win a few more games away as well? They've got a class goalkeeper in Onana. They've got young, exciting players like Garnacho, and they've got experienced assisters and goal scorers like Bruno Fernandes. The ingredients are there, But can Erik ten Hag be the chef to put the ingredients together and make them work lovely? How do you think Manchester United will do this season? Do you think they can improve on last season? Do you think they'll be about the same? Or do you think they're going to have a terrible one? Get your thoughts and feelings and opinions in to the email address. So, from the two teams in Manchester, we're off to the black and white stripes, the Magpies in Newcastle. Newcastle United finished 7th in the Premier League last year. They exited the Champions League in the group stages and they made it to the quarter-finals of both the League Cup and the FA Cup. However, where it seemed to go wrong for Newcastle was their ability to win games away from St James's Park. Out of a possible 57 away points, Newcastle only managed to pick up 14 of them. However, it's probably fair to say that Newcastle felt the pace last season. They played all their Premier League games and all their Champions League games, and that can have an effect on the players' energy levels and their consistency. So, with them just playing Premier League football this year, and with a very good manager, I think we could see Newcastle having a much better season this time round. What do you think? Next up, it's Nottingham Forest. Nottingham Forest are a team who are very lucky to have stayed up last season, in my opinion, and it was a pretty miserable one for the fans to watch, with only 9 wins all season and 20 losses. They had 18 more goals scored against them than they scored themselves, and they also didn't really come close to progressing in any of the competitions they were involved in. They had a round 2 exit of the League Cup to Burnley and an exit in the 5th round of the FA Cup at home to Manchester United. Steve Cooper was the man who was looking after Forest, and he was very much liked by the majority of the Forest fans. But their newish manager, Nuno Santo, will have to work some magic to ensure this season is better than the last one. But with good players like Chris Wood and Morgan Gibbs-White, along with a massive support base, Forest, I'm sure, can improve on last season. But the big question is, can they do it with the competitiveness and the top quality of football which will be happening in the Premier League this season? What do you think? From Nottingham Forest to Saints, Southampton returned to the Premier League after winning the playoff final against Leeds at Wembley Stadium this year. As a Pompey fan, I'm not going to lie, I was really hoping they'd stay in the Championship so that we could have that all-important South Coast derby, but it wasn't meant to be. Last season, Southampton went on a 25-game unbeaten streak. They scored lots of goals in the Championship, 87 of them to be precise, and they were pretty dominant at home, winning 15 home games. The Premier League is a couple of levels higher than the standard of football in the Championship, and Southampton have got their work cut out. How would they perform against the likes of City, Arsenal, Villa or Liverpool? Their head coach Russell Martin will have his work cut out, but he's got some solid players, and Southampton aren't a team who are not familiar with the Premier League, as it's a place that they've been in and out for many, many years. How do you think Southampton will do this season? From the south coast to the north of London, let's go to Tottenham. They finished 5th in the Premier League last year, narrowly missing out on a Champions League spot. Last season, Tottenham didn't draw a single game at home. They either won or they lost. 13 times they collected 3 points at home, and 6 times they drew. Their away record was a bit of a mixed bag though. 7 wins, 6 losses and 6 draws. Harry Kane has been the man who scored all the goals, but Heung-min Son has really got into his groove, and he was not only the joint top assister of the season, but a top Premier League goal scorer for Spurs when he stuck himself on the score sheet on 17 separate occasions. To improve on last season, Spurs will need to make sure they get more wins away from home, which has been a theme of this episode. How do you think Tottenham Hotspurs will do this season? Well, that was Spurs, and now it's the Hammers. They finished 9th in the Premier League last season. They went crashing out of the FA Cup in the third round and made it to the quarter-finals of both the League Cup and the Europa Cup. It was a mixed season for Hammers, both full of joy and disappointment. It seems that West Ham's problem last year was most definitely defence, as they had 74 goals scored against them, which is more goals conceded than any other team in this year's Premier League. The majority of the goals which they conceded were also on away soil, and they lost 10 of their away games and drew 2 of them. The mighty Hammers will need the likes of Jared Bowen to score plenty more, but they'll certainly need that defensive back line to be better than it's been in a very long time, because without that, they're going to be in a similar position. Lastly, it's Wolves. Last season, they finished 14th in the Premier League and made it to the quarter-finals of the FA Cup, but they were pretty inconsistent at home, winning 8 games and losing 8 games at home. They also had a lot of goals scored against them, with 65 hitting the back of their net. They did score 50 decent goals of their own though. Their manager, Gary O'Neill, will have a tough job to keep them afloat in an extremely competitive league this year. But he's a quality manager and he knows what he's doing. I do have a feeling though that this season will be a difficult one for Wolves, and I reckon they will float between the relegation zone and safety for the majority of the season. What do you think? Well, that was 20 teams and a pretty long episode. I hope that this has given you some good information, some good stats and some good facts, and hopefully it's got you excited for the next season of the Premier League. Thank you for listening, and remember, if you know somebody who loves football just as much as you do, then please tell them about Football for Kids. And whether you're playing football soon, watching it on the telly or pitch side, I hope that you enjoy the game. See you next time.